What is up, guys? Delboy here. Hope you guys are well. A quick prediction for Bryant Jennings versus Oscar Rivas. This fight goes down on the 18th of January and it is promoted by Top Rank. I've got to say, I really like this fight. I think it's an intriguing heavyweight battle, and stylistically, I believe this fight could be quite entertaining. Right off the bat, I've got to say I do make Bryant Jennings a favourite. Obviously, we know a lot more about Bryant Jennings. He's more experienced. He's been around for quite some time and he has fought some good competition. You know, he's been in there with the likes of Vladimir Klitschko and Luis Ortiz. He lost those fights, but, you know, he's also been in there with an unbeaten Arthur Spilka. He won that fight. He also fought an unbeaten Mike Perez. He won that fight. He beat Alexander Dimitrenko. He beat Andrei Fedosov. You know, Bryant Jennings is a good fringe contender, you know, always in shape. He can brawl, he can box, he's quite well rounded. There's a lot to like about Bryant Jennings. Tough guy as well. We kind of know where Bryant Jennings' ceiling is at, basically. You know, he kind of comes up short at top 5 level, but below that, you know, he's going to pick up wins and give guys a lot of problems. And the main kind of question going into this fight is, how good is Oscar Rivas? To me, I used to rate Oscar Rivas very highly on the come up, but he's kind of spent years in obscurity, and I do believe that has hindered his development. The inactivity hasn't done him any favours at all. Basically, he was inactive due to eye problems. At one point, he was only being licensed in Canada. That seems to have cleared up now, which is good. But, you know, the inactivity didn't help him. And to be honest, coming from a guy who spotted Oscar Rivas very early on in his career, to me recently, he seems to have regressed, to be quite honest with you. He's had 2 fights this year. One against a gentleman by the name of Herve Habu. He is from Belgium. Now, he's an okay heavyweight. He's not terrible, but you would expect an A-level prospect to be taking the likes of Herve Habu out, to be quite honest. In the first few rounds of that fight, Rivas looked nice and sharp. He looked quick. He was trying to let his hands go, landing that left hook, etc. But after the first 3 to 4 rounds, he noticeably slowed down. And after the first 3 to 4 rounds, he was basically looking for that one shot. And it was very monotonous and very easy for Herve Habu to read and survive. And to be honest, I wasn't really impressed with Rivas in that fight. I felt his stamina certainly looked a bit dodgy, to say the least. The other fight he had in 2018 was against Fabio Maldonado. Now, Fabio Maldonado has a good record on paper. It was 26-0, but this guy really isn't any good. He's basically an MMA fighter who occasionally boxes. If you look at Maldonado's record, look at some of the guys he's been beating. You know, really terrible competition. He had a pumped up record. He wasn't very good. And again, in that fight, similar to the Habu fight, Rivas looked quite good early on, but after the first 2 to 3 rounds, turns into a plodder, and he turns into a guy who's looking for one shot to get that knockout. And that is the reason why Maldonado also survived. Again, stamina for Oscar Rivas, it does look questionable, to be quite honest. And going into a fight with Bryant Jennings, that could be a big problem, because Bryant Jennings, you know, he's always in condition. He always comes to fight. And for a guy with bad stamina, a guy like Bryant Jennings can find you out. So Oscar Rivas' stamina, to me, is a big factor going into this fight. Stylistically, if we are to take these guys at face value, I do actually believe Rivas can give Bryant Jennings issues early on. Bryant Jennings in the past has been guilty of picking the wrong tactics at times. Look at the Luis Ortiz fight where he just kind of stood in front of Ortiz and let Ortiz do his thing. You know, you can't afford to stand in front of somebody like Oscar Rivas, who does have power, especially early on, like I said. If Bryant Jennings decides to trade early on and scrap in a phone box, as they say, then, you know, he's playing into Oscar Rivas' hands. because Rivas is dangerous in the first 3 to 4 rounds. He has scored some early knockouts in his career. That's a big no-no. Bryant Jennings, to me, needs to make the most of his longer reach. Bryant Jennings, for a guy of his size at heavyweight, has very long arms. And Jennings can box. Look at the Alexander Dimitrenko fight. Dimitrenko is like, 6'8"? And when Bryant Jennings used the jab consistently, he was actually beating Dimitrenko to the jab. You know, he's got really long arms, he's got a nice quick reaction time, and he's got fairly quick hands. If I'm Bryant Jennings, for the first 4 to 5 rounds, I stick and move with that jab, pop it in Rivas' face, make Rivas come forward, make him fall short, and, frustrate him. And as the fight wears on, as it gets past rounds 4 and 5, at that stage, if you want, then try to be a bit more aggressive, try to land some harder shots, and then slowly start to chop Rivas down. Because to me, Rivas is a totally different fighter once he gets past the early rounds. He's very explosive early on, but, he cannot really manage that stamina that well. Naturally, I think his conditioning is fairly poor, to be honest. And, Bryant Jennings can take advantage of that if he boxes well early on and doesn't do anything stupid. But, Bryant Jennings, to me, has picked the wrong tactics in the past. Like I said, the Luis Ortiz fight is a good example. So if he does something like that, Oscar Rivas has a chance for an early knockout. But other than an early knockout, I cannot see Rivas winning this fight. I can't see Rivas winning on points. I don't think he has the work rate to compete with Bryant Jennings. And to me, a knockout in the second half of the fight is a hell of a lot less likely than in the first 4 to 5 rounds. I'm not saying it can't happen, but to me, Rivas, his power does diminish and his output drops considerably in the second half of the fight. So, yeah, I expect Bryant Jennings to win this fight. To me, he makes it as easy on himself as he wants to, really. If he decides to box with Rivas, I do believe he can win this fight comfortably. I know Rivas was a more accomplished amateur, but to me, Jennings, despite not having much of an amateur background, I am actually quite impressed with his all-round ability. I think he can box when he chooses to, and I think he has the attributes to make it a long night for Oscar Rivas. And I wouldn't even be surprised to see a late stoppage for Bryant Jennings, but what I see happening, like I said, dangerous Oscar Rivas early on, but, after that, I feel Jennings will start to outpoint, outwork, and outbox Rivas to a unanimous decision. Share your thoughts below on this fight. I'm really looking forward to it. 2 heavyweights on the smaller side. Rivas is about 6'1.5", whereas Bryant Jennings is 6'3". So not the biggest heavyweights in the world, and potentially these 2 guys, stylistically it could make for a really good fight. I'm looking forward to this fight. Not many people are talking about it. I think it's a bit underrated, going under the radar. Share your thoughts below. Peace.